Anna Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, reconnecting to your authentic self. I am so excited for today's guest and conversation. I admire her passion, her fierce advocacy, and her commitment to the trauma recovery work. In the aftermath of stress, adversity, and trauma, people often fall into survival mode and become disconnected from their true, authentic self. Signs of disconnection can take many forms: people-pleasing, self-sabotage, dysfunctional destruction, busyness, control, anxiety, depression, and more. In this episode, we will unpack some of the internal and external signs of disconnection and offer you some tools to empower you to journey home to yourself. We also talk about reparenting, a term I kind of dislike, a concept I endorse. Reparenting yourself means recognizing what you lost or what you didn't get as a child, and beginning to give those things to yourself now. My guest today is Dr. Thema Bryant. She's a clinical psychologist and president-elect of the American Psychological Association. She's also a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University and an ordained minister. Dr. Thema earned her doctorate from Duke University and completed her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School. With more than 20 years of experience in trauma recovery, she has appeared as a mental health expert on television, radio, and in print media. She has a book coming up. It's called Homecoming: Overcome Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole Authentic Self. As a survivor of sexual assault, racism, and evacuation from a civil war in Liberia, Dr. Thema Bryant knows intimately the work involved in healing. She raises awareness about mental health issues on the Homecoming podcast and her social media platforms. Daring to live authentically is so important because you come to realize that despite the ways you may have been derailed by adversity, you can genuinely love and accept yourself. I believe each of us can live more connected and in tune with our authentic selves. Before we get to today's conversation, here are a few episodes that you may find interesting, relevant, and enjoyable. Episode 65, an old one, Finding Authenticity, Meaning, and Fulfillment. Episode 82, Are You Stuck in the Past? Episode 84, Are You Living an Authentic Life? Episode 90, Childhood Trauma, Reclaiming Your Authentic Self. Episode 140, In Search of the True Self. Episode 163, How to Make Peace with Your Past and Heal Your Life. This is an episode with remarkable poet and spiritual teacher Mark Nebo, one of my all-time favorite episodes. Episode 164, Becoming Your True Authentic Self Unapologetically. This is, again, another excellent episode with Andrew Matthews. And lastly, episode 165, Breaking Free from Old Stories. And now, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Thema Bryant. Before we get to today's show, a quick shout out to our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most nutrient-dense whole foods daily supplement that I've ever tried. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for cultivating and practicing what I call radical self-care. If you want to show up greatly in your parenting, you need to take care of yourself. And part of radical self-care is eating right. But with so many stressors in our lives, in our go, 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 do, do, do culture, juggling busy schedules and multitude of responsibilities, maintaining a healthy, well-balanced diet can be difficult, especially for parents. And that can leave us deficient in key nutrients that our bodies need to thrive. This is where Athletic Greens can help. It's a life-changing nutritional habit. Their daily all-in-one superfood powder is your nutritional essential. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you one thing with all the best things. I've been using it for the past 2 years as part of my morning routine, and I love the simplicity, the ease of it, and it's delicious too. One tasty scoop of AG1 Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced ingredients, probiotic, and more that all work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid with digestion, and support a healthy immune system, all without the need to take multiple products or pills. I take it in the morning and I'm ready to face the day. And right now, for the listeners of my podcast, Athletic Greens has a special offer. A free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/authentic parenting and you'll be able to access this offer. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/authentic parenting and get your free supply of vitamin D for a year and 5 free travel packs. Well, Dr. Thema, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I admire you so much. And when you said yes, I said yes. It made me so happy.
Beautiful.
And you have a book coming up, which is amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you. And the book is based on my podcast. So I'm so excited to get it out for people to be able to take in the information.
Yeah, very good. So the title of the book is Homecoming. What I want to focus today is on connecting to our authentic self, connecting to ourselves, the homecoming. What I would love for you to do is from the very beginning is to define what is homecoming, and maybe from the beginning, what's homesick? What is being homesick means that we have to come back to our home.
Such a great question. So homecoming is the journey back to ourselves to heal enough to be able to show up fully as our authentic selves. And we get disconnected from ourselves because of stress and trauma. And we can be homesick in the sense of there are certain seasons in your life where you may have like an awakening moment where you realize I've been living not according to my truth. I've been living going through the motions, or my life as it is now looking does not reflect my values or my dreams. Maybe I have been following the scripts that other people gave me, society or my parents or my culture or my religion, but there are parts of it that do not ring true for me. And so I have that longing. What I say in the book is, can we admit those moments when I miss me? And sometimes we miss ourselves. We've been busy, we've been living life, but realizing that parts of ourselves we have left behind.
Do you think we all at some point in our life have that realization, because that's the purpose of our being here, because everybody is on a different trajectory, on a different timetable. But do you think that's our ultimate form of coming home?
Yes,
It's not like we're, I want to say, in other words, you can never die fully having been disconnected from yourself. At some point in your life, you're going to have awakening moments and desires and yearnings. Is that right?
absolutely. And I love that framing that it really is for everyone, right? It's not, oh, homecoming is for people who experience this or experience that. But as you're naming, it's the journey that we all have to take, and it's a continuous journey. One of the things I say in the introduction is I've had multiple homecomings because there are multiple moments of departure or disconnection. And also, we grow and change. And so, what was authentic for me at 15 is not my authentic self, at 35, at 45. And so it is a practice, a way of being, of continuously checking in and saying, like, is this real? Am I living in truth in this moment?
In other words, there's always an essence that we have, a core essence that never changes, and it's always part of us.
Yeah, yes. And that calling and that tug, and I'm going to say, and the courage to do it, because we live in a society, wherever people are on the planet, where there are so many pressures, and we are bombarded with these messages about how we're supposed to be, all the shoulds. And so to break through all of that, to that point of freedom, of liberation, to I'm going to show up as me. And it's actually contagious as well. Like when you get among free spirits, you feel freed up, right? You get more permission to really live from that place of openness.
Yeah, that's how I feel when I listen to you. I have to say that freedom, that flow, there is this beautiful melodic energy almost that comes from you. And I want to like hop on that wavelength,
Yes.
I feel that. It's so true.
I love that. And I love how you say you hear it and then you want to flow, right? Because that's, I think, when we really have impact, is like not only is the sound maybe appealing, but then it draws me into myself, right? That then, I can get into my own flow, my own rhythm, the dance of my life, right? That I can enter that instead of being a spectator in our own lives. Many times we can either be so much focused on the people around us or so much focused in productivity and accumulating, whether it's titles or resources or people or whatever that is. And so what I like to say is busy is not healed. You can be doing a lot and it can be a lot of nothing. And so really getting into the flow is important.
So let's talk a little bit about the timing of the trauma, because it plays a huge role in how you disconnect from yourself, how one disconnects, right? There's childhood trauma and trauma that happens after the age of 18. And there is a huge difference in how the person can disconnect from themselves.
Yeah, such an important distinction, because for those of us who had early experiences, we may not even remember a self before the trauma. I mean, some people grew up in households where it just was like stressful, toxic. From the beginning, you had to hide, or from the beginning, you had to adjust or modify yourself. And so I like to say we can return home or we can go home for the first time, right? So even if I don't have a memory of myself ever being welcome to live authentically, that I want to give myself that gift now, right? So that healing now. And even those who have trauma later in life, they may have some frame of reference of, before this event or before this season, I felt more grounded and connected. And yet, when I return home this time, I'm not going to be exactly the same, because trauma does affect us, right? I like to say it affects us, but it doesn't define us. And so I'm not trying to be necessarily who I was before, because now, experiences have shifted me in some particular ways. And yet I don't want to define myself by it or live out of the wound, the hurts of my past, but to be able to distinguish the wound from my true self.
Who is it harder for this homecoming process? Do you think that, like, from your experience working with people, what do you see across the spectrum?
Sure. So I do think those who have had long-term, we call complex trauma, it can be more challenging versus single incident. So if things were pretty stable and then you were at one event, perhaps like a school shooting or a sexual assault, where there is still plenty to have to work through. If you have had kind of the grounding and safety and stability before that and after that, that can feel a lot different than people who have had experiences that went on for years. So, like either childhood abuse goes on for years, intimate partner violence can be for years. And so, or growing up in a community where there was a lot of community violence. And so, often when we have had long-term experiences, it can be even more challenging to get our grounding. But I will say, even for those who have the single event, it can be so disruptive in terms of your sense of self and regulating your emotions. So none of them are easy, but it does make a difference when we get support in the aftermath, right? Both formally and informally. Because if you go through a horrible thing and people like minimize it or say, stop being sensitive, or you're making too, big a deal of it, then it is harder than if we are met with compassion, with care, with support, with even being believed, because some people are not believed in terms of the traumas they have been through.
Let's talk about external and internal signs of disconnection. I like that you write about those two parts distinctly. You took the time to do that. I absolutely love that. So let's talk about the internal signs of disconnection. How can one know? This was a question actually from our community members. One of the listeners said, Anna, you talk about on the podcast all the time about being disconnected from your authentic self. What does it really mean? How do I know if I'm disconnected?
Right. Such an important piece to know, like, do I even need this journey? Maybe I'm already at home with myself. And it's like, are we? Right. So, some of those internal signs can be depression. Depression disconnects us from ourselves because, I like to say depression is a liar. It tells us only like negative things about ourselves, about our possibility, about our future, about our past. It glosses over anything good to make it that it is like perpetually in a negative state. And so that leaves you really disconnected. And some people's depression shows up as irritability. And those people don't get a lot of compassion. So if people think of you as a person with a bad attitude, particularly if you're a woman, right, a woman with a bad attitude, people don't usually respond with compassion, but often under that irritability is a despair. We can also be disconnected with ourselves. A sign can be that anxiety. And so like nothing feels safe, nothing feels secure, nothing feels okay. So we're living, or in terms of PTSD, with that hypervigilance, right? Where I'm always on guard. And if I am perpetually on guard, then I cannot really be at home, physically or emotionally or spiritually. If we are stuck in our anger and it's consuming us, then we can be disconnected. And I want to name when we're stuck and when we're consumed, because anger in and of itself is a natural, healthy part of our emotional life. But when I feel like the rage is overwhelming to me and I can't see anything but it, and I can't experience any fulfillment, any pleasure, any peace in my life because of that, there's a disconnect. And then for some people, dissociation. And so actually feeling numbness, with what we have going on in the world today, if you see all of that and you don't feel anything, that's a trauma response. That's an indication of disconnection. And some of us developed that skill early in life. You had a childhood trauma and it was something you could not physically get away from, then the mind kind of learned to check out, to put you someplace else, in the ceiling, out the window, wherever it was, in a fantasy world. And so some of us as adults can continue to do that. So you're maybe even losing time, like, oh, where did the time go? Or what was I doing? Or what was I thinking? And so all of those can be warning signs to us of, I think I'm disconnected, as well as an overall feeling of unfulfillment. Are you unfulfilled in your relationships, unfulfilled in your work life, unfulfilled in your parenting? At your core, some are frustrated dreamers, frustrated artists. What are the things that you put on the back burner? Maybe you put you on the back burner and never got back to that. So that feeling of emptiness, longing, unfulfillment, discontent, all of those are signs of homesickness, the desire to come home to yourself.
How about external signs?
Yes. So our behavior is important to pay attention to, because some of us are not only deceiving other people, but some of us have tricked ourselves. And we say, like, I love myself, right? I'm amazing. I feel great, like all of these things. But if we look at the way we are living, it can sometimes tell a different story. So we look at kind of self-destructive or self-sabotaging patterns. If I love myself, but I remained in friendships with people who mistreat me, what is going on there? Where my loyalty to them is more important than my care for myself. If looking at, what I eat, and I say for those who have access to healthy foods, what are the things I am feeding myself, can say a lot about how I feel about myself. My relationships, how I am in romantic relationships, says something about how at home am I with me. When people are in that dating arena and feeling like they have to, or some people even in marriage, feeling like they have to perform, right? Or to pretend. So if you're not even you with the people who are supposed to be loving you, there is a disconnect.
Yeah, let's talk about this external signs. I think people pleasing, sabotaging, self-sabotaging, self-abandonment, self-neglect, a little more. And most importantly, what I would like to get today to is how one can reclaim themselves, how you can slowly take steps to connecting to yourself through what means, and you can speak about maybe reparenting. Even though I have to say I don't like that term, reparenting ourselves, so much, but I want to know how you feel about that word, reparenting ourselves. You use it, but what's your feeling about it?
So you've asked a couple of questions. Do you want me to go back to the...
I know I said a lot of things. Yeah.
So I can go back to, I didn't touch on the people pleasing. I'll do that one first. So it's a sign of disconnect when, and some people were raised, and I talk about in the book that can also be related to gender or culture or religion, where you're raised to perpetually attend to the needs of others and to neglect yourself. And so it becomes, I am enough if other people deem me to be enough, if other people decide I'm worthy, if other people are happy with me. And some of us are not even in touch with our own needs. So we have never been given permission to know that our needs matter, right? Our feelings matter, our desires matter. And so as opposed to people who are selfish or self-absorbed or led by ego, there can be this perpetual need to prove my worthiness based on what other people think of me. And that can put you in a very dangerous place because people will want you to do all kinds of things. And so we can have a lack of boundaries, a lack of clarity. There's no communication. It's not two-sided. It's not mutual or reciprocal. And so for those who are stuck in that people pleasing, a part of the tool is getting to the root of that, right? Who told you that your needs were not important? Where did you first learn that message? And often those messages were given very early. So it becomes, who told me? And then, do I still believe it? and starting to heal those early wounds so that some of what we were fed is not true. So then I can free myself to say, actually, it's not about me chasing other people's rubber stamp or validation. And then that connects with this reparenting. And we can think about it, conceptualize it in a number of different ways. The way that it resonates for many of our readers and listeners are there are some people who are walking around with such heartache over the things they never received, over the harm from parents, not only the abuse in terms of, as say, physical or sexual, but I'm really thinking of the emotional neglect and feeling like, can I ever really be whole if I didn't get that? Right? My parents abandoned me, or if my parents treated me like I was invisible or I was only there to serve them. So some people are walking around with a fundamental sense of brokenness beyond repair. And so it is that idea of how, another way to name it really is self-nourishment and self-love and self-care, which people critique and note along with self-care, we need community care. And I would say it's not either or, it's both, right? Being in caring relationships is also very healing. And so, what we talk about, the way I describe it in the book, are some things that healthy parents do for their children, and then the ways in which we can do that for ourselves in the present. And so, one example of that is, part of healthy parenting is structure, right? Getting a sense where kids have some sense of reliability, that my parents are not just going to disappear and I don't know when or if they're coming back. Right. I'm not wondering like if we're going to eat today. Right. There's a sense that like this is the routine. These are things I can rely on. And so for ourselves to get in the habit of having some structure to our day and to our lives, to be in some ways, gatekeeper for my own life, that I'm not just blowing in the wind. And that brings up, this piece of boundaries, right? That I'm going to protect my time. I'm going to protect my mental health. I'm going to nourish myself.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is such critical piece, right? If you feel deep down unworthy of love or you don't matter, you also believe that your time doesn't matter. You can dispose of your time, your attention, your energy, yourself. You don't care how you spend your resources because, you are a worthless piece of something. Nobody cared. But I think starting to establish, like I love how you say a healthy parent has to provide that love and also the structure, right? And if a person didn't have that structure, they can struggle a lot, actually. Where should someone begin with this? What would be the biggest impact, do you think, in terms of creating structure for yourself? Because if you've never had it and you've struggled all your life, it could be overwhelming, and it's a foreign language, right? So where can one begin to get some kind of impact and confidence to continue on?
Right. Such a great question. And, how we frame it in therapeutic terms is setting attainable goals that are a stretch, but that are doable. Because one of the difficulties that we have, and I'm glad you raised that piece of building confidence, because sometimes if we are starting with no structure and we set the goal of like supreme structure, it's a setup for failure, right? Frustration, disappointment. And then you can just say, I'm not good at it. This isn't me. So like, never mind. And I think the example I give in the book is, if you had KFC last night, you might not want to say, today I'm going to be vegan for the rest of my life, right?
That's good. Yeah, right, that's good.
Right. We start with meatless Mondays. So, and so, I especially, around like sleep hygiene, when I have clients who are used to staying up till like 3, 4 in the morning and then being tired all day, it won't work for us to say, okay, you're used to staying up till 3, now go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock. It's just too big of a jump, as you're saying. And so for biggest impact, I would say, smaller increments where it's going to be a stretch. It's different for you, but it's possible. So I make it more conversational for people to reflect on, what do I think I could actually do like this week that I could start with. And so if that is, if 1 a.m. is a success for you, like if you're used to 3, 4, then it may be, okay, no later than 1, I'm in the bed. Okay, let's do that this week and see, how that goes and we monitor what made it easier, what made it difficult. And so to do that for yourself, the same thing, I had clients around mealtime, where if they grew up in a home where think of, someone whose, let's say, father was absent, mother lived with mental illness. There were never regular meals. And it was kind of every person is out for themselves. So get it wherever you're going to get it, make what you're going to make for you. And so now in married life, this client is really having difficulty, especially marrying someone who had this expectation of like these regular meals on the table every day, 3 times a day. So to be, as you name, to get to what he's desiring is overwhelming and seems impossible. Like that seems like, what in the world? Like I can't do that. Like that's an attack on my personhood. And so then like what is the compromise? What feels doable? It's a stretch, but what would be doable in terms of some sense of like family meals, right? Us sitting down at the same time together, right? And so attainable goals is a great way to start and think about your sleep, think about your eating, and think about rest. This is a particularly challenging one for many people in the pandemic, especially because if you're working from home, it can feel like you're never off, right? And what happened for me when at the beginning of the pandemic is people, quote unquote, know you're home. So call, text, email, all times of day or night, and are expecting these like immediate responses because like, where are you, right? We're all at home. And so setting boundaries around your work schedule as well, of like, that's it, working with a client who's a physician and saying, I'm going to leave at this time no matter what. And whatever notes don't get done, that's the end. When I get home, like that's my time or that's my family time. So in each of those different care categories, begin to set those attainable goals.
Yeah, boundaries is huge. I've been watching a friend grow and heal after an abusive divorce. And I see her, how she's evolving. And now boundaries were a foreign concept for her. And after a few years, now she's like a pro, even with her own mother. She set such amazing boundaries. I'm like, wow, this is so amazing to see this growth because you gain a little confidence. She didn't upheaval her entire life and start setting boundaries left and right with everybody. She started small, and now she is at that point where she's setting boundaries with critical people, and it's never easy, but she feels good because she's preserving herself, and it's self-care. And it's wonderful. A lot of parents struggle with boundaries with their own kids, right? Especially the parent who grew up boundaryless in a chaotic environment. They are struggling because they want to be nice and accommodating, but it goes to the extreme. With their kids, they have a hard time saying no or holding the limit, setting the limit. I'm wondering if you can say a few things. You're a parent, correct? Yourself?
Yep.
How old is your child or children?
So yes, I have 2. So one is 16 and one is 9.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about boundaries when it comes to parenting.
Yes, absolutely. And first, I just want to celebrate your friend that you mentioned, because setting boundaries with your own parents is a real challenge. So the fact that you're saying she's been able to do that with her mother, that's fantastic, because I know many people may say, oh, with strangers or even at work can be easier than some family dynamics. So great to see that progress and that testimonial that she came out of a difficulty and now seeing her grow in that area. And I think we need those stories to know it's possible, because some people have this idea of like, there are people who are good with boundaries and then there are those of us who are not. And like, that's it, like you're stuck. But to know you can grow and develop them. And so, yes, even in our parenting, it is so important. And as you name, sometimes as in terms of overcompensating, if we grew up in environments that did not feel nourishing, we can then end up so much focused on the nourishment, the acceptance, the love, that there's no boundaries or structure. And so we can associate anything that feels like a rule or a guideline or as a boundary as controlling or abusive, right? I don't want to be that, so they can do whatever they want and I'm just going to love them. And that really misses a part of our role and responsibility to teach, to guide, to try to protect to the best of our ability, and to prepare children for the world, right? To be able to, for them to have healthy relationships, for them to be able to thrive. And children who have no sense of structure or guidance can feel like they're just, out there unanchored, right? Without clarity or without preparation. And I will say, a big piece to look at not only is, your own stuff or what you bring to the table as a parent, but actually taking the time to get to know your kid, right? Because kids are very different, personality wise, energy wise, and, what they need, the ways in which you want to show up for them. And so, I laughingly tell people that my daughter, who is the oldest, gave me a lot of confidence as a parent, and my son gave me a lot of humility as a parent. So, and it's important, right, to have the range. My daughter was one of those kids where if you say something, she would just do it, right? So I teach at Pepperdine University, and people were laughing, reflecting on when my daughter was still like in a stroller. There was some faculty meeting, and my child care fell through, and I came to the meeting with my daughter. And she sat so peacefully and calmly in that little stroller and, played her little games and ate her snacks. And, the other parents on the faculty were amazed, like, I could never bring my kid to a faculty meeting. How did you do that? Like I had some magic power, but it really is how she arrived at the planet. Like, that's just who she is. And but coming from that framework, I, could think of like, oh, why don't people just talk to their kids? You just tell them, to have a seat or do this or do that, and they do it. And so my son is the fireball. He's the energetic one. He's the one you have to repeat yourself several times, and, gives a lot more humility and compassion, when you see parents out in public struggling with their kids. And so, learning their different rhythms and what they need and what they respond to is important. So, my daughter, I don't have to like go through every sheet in her binder because she's kind of self-motivated. She's gonna do it. With my son, it's like, bring me all the forms. I'm going to have to look through it to see like what is due and when is it due, right? And so for us to show up with compassion, with humility, and seeing the joy in all the different flavors, right? It would not work for me to say, why don't you become more like this? It's not, why aren't you like your sister? Like, there is such gift in who he is and enjoying that. We go out on the trampoline, he likes capoeira, like he's, and it's interesting. My daughter's name means love and my son's name means joy. So they're Ife and Io. And, it's rich. And at the same time, I have to be responsive to what they come with, who they are.
Yeah. In what language? In what language they mean love and joy?
Yes, Yoruba. So both their names are from Nigeria.
Oh, wow. That's nice. So, well, let's talk about joy, because part of connecting to ourselves is not only doing this quote unquote healing work and getting wrapped up in this heavy lifting labor, looking at our past. And it's part of it is finding and connecting to joy, allowing joy into our life, right? Having fun, discovering joy. I would love for you to talk about that too.
Yes, thank you so much for raising that. And one of the things I talk with my clients about, and also my students who are training at Pepperdine to be mental health professionals, is healing is not just about what we call symptom cessation. So it's not just like getting rid of symptoms of distress, because you can no longer be suicidal but still have no joy, right? You could no longer be cutting or emotional eating or binging in the way that you were and still not really have a sense of purpose or peace or aliveness. And that really is the part of the work. It's like, yes, heal the wounds of the past, but then cultivating joy in my present. That joy is not just something I am waiting for other people to give me, right? Or like I'll be joyful, when I get married, or I'll be joyful when I get a certain amount of money, or I'll be joyful when I get a title. But how do I cultivate and create joy in my present life? And I have the capacity to bring that to myself. It is something we have to develop and be intentional about. So Howard Thurman is was a great theologian, and he has this quote that says, "Do the thing that makes you come alive, because there are far too few people who are actually alive." And that's the piece. It's like, what rings your joy bell? Like, so for me, it's dancing. I love to dance. And then sometimes I can be so caught up in the hustle and bustle of life. It's like, oh, when was the last time I danced, right? And so being intentional about setting the time and the energy to do the things that bring us joy. And that is internal work. We can have joy bringers that are outside of ourselves, but the gift is also being able to have it internally. And, I like to tell the story of when I was working at a place that was pretty toxic and very stressful. And one morning I was walking into the building, and the assistant director was coming in at the same time. And she said, "Thema, you always seem so happy. And I get the feeling it has nothing to do with this place." And I told her, "You're right. You're right. If I was dependent on this place for my joy, I'd be a miserable person." And so I come with my joy. I'm not coming hoping that this workplace is going to give it to me, because that's a setup. And so for us to think about, one of the ways I encourage people to do is to come up with their morning ritual. What are the things that you want to do at the start of your day? And it may change, in a few weeks or a few months, but, whether that's like reading poetry or reading sacred texts, if that's journaling, if that's meditating, if that's praying, if that's dancing, so that you can shape your day, so you can start the tone of your day instead of hoping something in my day will give me some enjoyment.
Well, that's that victim mentality. Like, I don't have a say in my life. I don't have a sense of agency. Things are happening to me. I am not responsible, therefore, right? Or I'm not deserving of joy. Some people feel that too. I'm not deserving. They're still perpetuating that self-punishment, self-harm by even denying joy sometimes, let alone cultivating and seeking it or allowing it to be. I think this is such a big part of healing.
Yeah. And I love that you named worthiness, right? Because sometimes this goes back to the people pleasing. I can think that other people are deserving of joy, so I want to work to make sure they're happy, right? My kids should be joyful, or my partner should be joyful.
Yeah, when my kids are happy, I'm happy. No, that's BS. That doesn't work like that. They can be happy. They're their own person. They're their own life.
Person, yes. That we are deserving of joy. And I want to also name, sometimes we're punishing ourselves because we feel guilty about things in our past. So that piece of self-forgiveness is important. And sometimes we're punishing ourselves for things other people did to us. So it's not even like I need to forgive myself, but people have treated me so terribly that I have concluded I must not be worthy of good treatment, or I must not be worthy of joy. And then another category, people who have committed to living a joyless life out of grief. So when we get stuck in that grief, it's been over a year, but feeling like in some ways to laugh is to betray the person I love, right? Or to enjoy my life is to say their loss doesn't matter. So we can frame things in ways that really keep us emotionally imprisoned, as opposed to in honor of them, in part in honor of them, I am living fully, that I'm not taking this time for granted or life for granted. And I know they would actually want me to have joy. And so getting back into living is an important part as well.
Yeah, another thing is people compare their loss, their grief to other people's, and they minimize theirs because other people's is so big. During COVID, I've noticed that too. Families who had COVID or deaths, a person would say, "Oh my gosh, I know I didn't lose anything." We all lost things during COVID, and everybody struggled on their own way. But I know people who were comparing their losses and saying, minimizing theirs, as if I can't be happy now because you suffered way more, right? Your suffering was bigger than mine. But I think that's a flawed place to be. And it's not going to help you or others. If you're in a happy place, you're not taking from their happiness when you're happy, first of all, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you named what we, frame it. There's visible and invisible losses, right? Acknowledged and unacknowledged losses. And sometimes they're not acknowledged by other people. And sometimes, as you name, they're not acknowledged to ourselves. And so for us to not do that trauma hierarchy, right, of mine doesn't count because, this person lost 3 people, I only lost 1, or this person lost 1 and I only lost a job, or, we can do all of this, comparison instead of letting each experience stand in its own, right? Of, lost time, lost memories, lost opportunities, lost expectations, lost relationships. And so to allow ourselves to grieve our losses. And then also, the flip side you're speaking to is allow ourselves permission for the joy. And I know particularly during the pandemic, sometimes people get good news and feel like guilty to share it, or feel like you can't share it because there's a lot of suffering in the world. And so that whole piece of we can hold more than one emotion at the same time. So I can hold so much compassion and care for a friend who is really going through a hard time, and at the same time feel joyful that something I was working for, hoping for, happened for me. And as you name, like, one does not erase the other.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can speak about how one can increase their sense of agency, because trauma takes that away, right? You become so overwhelmed and powerless and helpless, especially if it happened early on in your life.
Mm-hmm.
How can one increase that sense of agency and take responsibility for cultivating joy and self-care and all of those things that we are talking about?
Right. Yeah, I'm so glad you named
right?
that.
I think that's like foundational, right?
Yeah. So one of the pieces in, actually we call it kind of the knapsack section of like the tools that you need to get home to yourself, is this piece of self-confidence and being confident in my voice and in my agency, or a sense of empowerment. And what I describe there is, it's not instant or magical in the sense of like, okay, say this affirmation and now I have agency, right? But the way it develops is by practice and by doing it repeatedly. So we may have spent years of our lives holding back, hiding, being less than we are. And so stepping out, speaking your mind, making decisions is going to initially feel awkward, and you're going to have some anxiety. But that whole thing of moving forward with it is how I built the confidence. So the example, I give in the book is when I first started training to be a therapist, initially, our graduate program was very protective. And so they would not give you people with like major life concerns. It was more like day-to-day events, stress about work, stress about relationships, stress about parenting. And, you can build up. And then when I went on internship, and, the first time had clients who had dissociative identity disorder or had schizophrenia, initially was like, wait, like, am I ready? Right. And I would feel like not ready. But the more I did the work, the more it was like, oh, okay, right? The confidence grows over time. And so I want to encourage people to be compassionate with themselves instead of, often in our society, we want instant results, right? Like, tell me the the smoothie to drink, and then I'll be confident and empowered. It's like you gain empowerment in the doing. And so to set specific goals. So, for example, if at your job you never speak in meetings, to say this week, if we have a weekly meeting, I want to find something on the agenda that I can speak to or some contribution I can make. If I have not felt confident to say, some people have these dreams that they have never manifested. So one day I'm going to start a business. One day I'm going to take voice lessons, and so to change one day into a concrete plan. So this week, can you look online and search where are the places that help you develop a business plan? Or where are the places where they have these voice lessons you've dreamed about for 20 years? And so making the steps so that it goes from dream to manifestation.
How about in terms of relationships?
Yes, absolutely.
What
So,
steps can you take in that arena?
yeah, so good. And so in our relationships, to take the risk of showing up in truth. And when you've had unhealthy relationships, often we learn to censor, to hide, to not really say what we think or what we feel. And so to let that be a measure and to see how does this friendship respond or how does this person respond to my truth and my authenticity, right? To give them an opportunity to actually get to know you for real, right? That's the intimacy versus when I'm either living out of fear that this person's going to blow up because other people in my past blew up when I was honest, or that fear of abandonment, right? That when I show up as myself, maybe people are going to say I'm not good enough and they're going to leave me. And, what I say to that is if revealing yourself leads to it ending, it needed to end. Because then this is not a real relationship if they're not in relationship with the real you. And so setting that goal of saying, instead of pretending I don't feel what I feel, or I don't need or want anything, that I'm going to share what I felt, right? Or what I feel, whether that is sharing upset about something that happens, or whether that is sharing, in that positive sense of like your love and care for this person, taking that risk of the vulnerability, the truth telling, the transparency, and seeing like, is this real? That's the only way to know it is to actually reveal parts of yourself. And I want to say in part, because it's not that like you have to immediately tell someone your life story, but if you have been engaging, for some time and it's still very surface, and maybe they talk a lot about themselves and you reveal nothing, to say, I want to, in this relationship, cultivate more honesty.
When you speak of vulnerability or speaking your truth, saying things, I think I want to make a point that sometimes people take that too far and become rude and say obnoxious things to people that held inside for years as grudges and as resentments. Can you provide a clarification on this? Because we don't want people, going and saying things that they think they're being vulnerable.
Right. So I'm glad you raised that because vulnerability is not an attack. Right. And some
Ooh,
people,
so good. Yeah.
some people will say, I'm just telling the truth. And so
Yeah.
it is not only what we say, but it is how we say it. It is the timing and what is the intention, right?
Mm.
Is my goal that I want to break them down? Is my goal I want to hurt them because they hurt me? So like what is really going on here? And what is the root emotion at the core of your desire to share it? And when I talk about truth telling, it's not let me tell them about themselves. Like, let me tell about myself, right? That the reason I responded the way I did yesterday is because I was anxious, right? Because I was feeling insecure. right? This is my truth, right? Not like, let me tell you all the terrible things I've observed about you.
Because that's when we are in that place, we're disconnected from ourselves.
That's right.
When we take responsibility and become vulnerable courageously, it's about our feelings. This is how it made me feel. This is my need to connect. This is what it means to me. It has nothing to do with the other person. I think this is good to speak about this. Yeah.
And let me say, so that people who fall in the other end of the spectrum don't go into the trap of, well, since it's about them, then I'm stuck. No, if you're honest with yourself and you are really unfulfilled with this person, then it may be your truth telling that this season has ended. And so it doesn't mean you have to stay in situations that are unhealthy or unfulfilling, but let it be guided by your heart, right? That's the important piece.
Yeah. Well, as we approach the end of our conversation here, I love this topic. I can go on for hours.
Yeah.
And as we approach the end, keeping the theme alive, how can we connect with our true self, come back to ourselves, homecoming? What would be your final message, question for the person to ponder upon, or favorite tips or something like that, just to conclude, bring it home, this message.
Bring it home. Yes. So I will share with you a meditation that I recommend at the beginning of the book, which is, in your quiet time or in this moment, to just get still. It aligns with you. You can close your eyes and just picture yourself when you're at home with you. What does that look like? What would it look like? What would it feel like? What would your voice sound like? How would you dress? Where would you go if you were living from truth? If you were being your authentic self? To hear what your laugh sounds like when it's in that authentic place? To be able to see yourself resting, of what would my sleep look like when I am in my authentic place? What will my relationships look like when they're not driven by fear or the trauma of the past, but when it's really in the present? And as you picture yourself at home within yourself, allow that to be your motivating inspiration for even when there are detours, even when it is difficult, that I am committed to reclaiming that person that I see who is me.
Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, Dr. Thema, for your presence, for your wisdom, for your heart. I loved every moment of it. And congratulations on the book tour.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad for you, for the work that you're doing, and for your audience, your community here. Thank you for having me. This was very joyful.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What's your biggest takeaway? How connected do you feel to your authentic self? Did you learn something new? I love hearing from you. How are you enjoying the podcast? What are your recent favorite episodes and topics? I welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. Always. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for you, my international listener, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me your voice message. If you enjoy the podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or rating the show on Spotify, which is a new feature. Also, consider becoming a patron. With a small monthly contribution, you can support your favorite show and get supporter-only content and benefits. Go to patreon.com/authentic parenting to learn more, or click the link in your show notes. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. And you can connect with me on Instagram, the only social media platform that I use. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.